It's inevitable when the whole world is trying to get in and watch this.
Okay, now we can start. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our lecture and concert, Sufis Meet on the Silk Road, from Yunus, Emre and Rumi to Amir Khusrau and Kabir. My name is Barış Köktepe, and I'm the foreign representative of the Bilim ve Ütopya magazine, a monthly published Turkish science, culture, and politics magazine. Our magazine was founded in Turkey in 1993, and since then we are covering an extensive spectrum of different topics, such as health, philosophy, evolution, physics, archaeology, and history. In our magazine, we publish articles written by scientists and authors from Turkey and all over the world. We try to provide a comprehensive and in-depth view into the issues to our readers, while targeting not only academics and experts, but also students and the general public. As the Bilim ve Ütopya foreign representation, we also organize events targeting an audience outside of Turkey. Specifically, we try to connect academics, students, and anyone who's interested in the sciences of the Turkish community abroad by organizing events on a regular basis in Turkish language, and of course in English language as well. The founder of the Turkish Republic and the leader of the Turkish Revolution, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, once said, "Science is the only true guide in life." We have internalized this sentence as our main principle, and we try to act accordingly. These days, in Turkey and all over the world, science is under the attack of imperialism and feudal convictions. The main purpose of these attacks is to remove science from the center of life and hence to mitigate science. On a higher level, the reliability of science is questioned and it's pushed into becoming a purely technical act which is only accessible to an exclusive circle of experts of their respective fields. As the Bilim ve Ütopya magazine, our goal is to repel these attacks towards science and objective truths and to provide access to this extensive knowledge which humankind accumulated over centuries to a general public readership. Having said that, I would like to finish my part and head over to Mr. Mustafa Mersinoğlu, who will moderate today's event. Thank you a lot for your patience, and I wish you a pleasant journey through the Silk Road.
Hello, once again, welcome to Sufis Meet on the Silk Road. Dear friends, I believe we have people watching this program, not only on the Silk Road, but from many lands and cultures. I would like to give my heartfelt thanks to the editors and publishers of Science and Utopia, a journal of science with an ethical and moral conscience. I also like to mention a young brother, Emre Babaoğlu, who helped bring this program together. Thank you, Emre. Some of you might have noticed his name is similar to Yunus Emre. He's no relative of his, but in Turkey, Yunus Emre, the mystic poet, is loved so much, some even named it totally Yunus Emre. And through the centuries, many poets fashioned their poems and outlook after Yunus Emre, and even took the name Yunus Emre. As Barış said, I'm Mustafa Mersinoğlu. I'm from Turkey as well, and I have been given the honor to present this wonderful lecture and concert. My Yunus Emre is his poetry, which directed and gave joy to my life to this day. Yunus Emre was acknowledged by UNESCO in 1991, and it was declared the Year of Love in his honor, and that was his 750th birthday. This year has been declared the Yunus Emre year in Turkey, and also Yunus Emre and Turkish language year in Turkey, and this is also acknowledged by UNESCO as well. Yunus Emre lived in the 13th century, and he was a contemporary of Rumi, the famous whirling dervish. The tradition says they met. Yunus Emre is less well known in the world, and his poems were Turkish, and he is considered one of the best conveyors of Turkish language through the centuries. Emir Khusrau and Kabir, that's the two Sufi poets on our program today. I shamefully know very little. Nowadays in Turkey, though, there is a great interest and thirst among the youth, and like myself, old, great desire to learn about great Asian civilizations and cultures and poetry and literature. And we are very lucky to have Latif Polat, who does know about all these things and a little bit more. Without further ado, here is the Turkish singer, composer, scholar, and of Turkish folklore, my dear friend Latif Polat. Latif Polat.
Thank you, Mustafa. Well, everybody, warm Mediterranean greetings from the shores of the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean today. And today we will talk about many things, and I will play some music for you. We'll have some poetry, and this presentation is going to be in English, but the music and the poetry is going to be in English, but the music is going to be in Turkish because somehow the songs cannot be really sang in English. We tried it quite a bit, but it doesn't work. It doesn't really convey the feeling of it, or even the meters, it doesn't really fit. Anyway, I am no expert of Indian Sufism or the Sufism in India or the Silk Road area. However, I have worked on the Sufi mystic traditions of Turkey and overall Sufi mysticism for almost 35 years. As a matter of fact, when I was watching Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, it took me back almost 25 years ago, that I watched his concert twice in Berkeley, California, where I lived, University of California campus. Almost 3,000 people were all dancing at the same time toward the end of this concert. It was like an electrifying musical style. Those days, I didn't do Sufi music. I was a generic Turkish musician, and also I was a computer engineer in Silicon Valley those days. But what converted me from generic Turkish music to Sufi music is the Qawwali music. Not Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan per se, but Sabri brothers. There's another really giant, literally and physically giant people. These are the Sabri brothers. Ghulam Farid was really a huge person, and the wonderful folkloric style of Qawwali that they did. And one day I was listening to their cassette. Those days there were cassettes, and then it took me away. It took me away to somewhere that I didn't know what it was. And then once I came back to this earth, I said, I am going to do this kind of music. Since I didn't know Urdu and I couldn't do Qawwali, I said, okay, Latif, you're a musician. Look into your own tradition, your own culture. I'm sure you'll find something. So I knew Yunus Emre those days anyway. But you see, coming from the left spectrum of the political world, somehow still as of 2021, unfortunately, in the sort of leftist political circles, still we have prejudices for Sufi mysticism or in general religion related things. So it was sort of a challenge to pass through that stage, to remove the prejudices. But I did, and I'm glad I did, because I found a great wealth of musical tradition, poetic tradition, literature, life stories, and more than 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge that I found. And I'm still learning. I'm still a great student of any of these wonderful people, especially Yunus Emre, Rumi, Kabir. Uh, so that is how my interest uh, went into the Sufi tradition. Why Indian? How do I know Kabir? Because I did concerts in India 10 years in a row, 2 months every year. I did the Ruhaniyat Festival, which went around. I mean, there is no major city I didn't travel in India, and I really enjoyed it. It was like a second home to me. And also, I did a Kabir Yatra in northern Madhya Pradesh into Rajasthan, where it is said that Kabir lived and traveled as a traveling Sufi. For a week, we lived in the villages and then performed in the village squares. It was like an eye-opener experience. It is just like going back into time 700, 500, 600 years ago, time of Kabir. He literally traveled with us, I united Kabir with Yunus Emre in those village squares, believe it or not. And 2, 3, 4,000 villagers used to come until 4 a.m. in the morning. You do this music. And the Qawwali music is always the closer of these concerts because the electricity, electrifying nature of that music, which is strongly related to our subject matter of today. So with that introduction, let me play a little music and then I'll talk more. So this is the Turkish sitar in a way. It's called the saz. It is a long, very historical presence that it has from Central Asian days. Uh, Ben melanet hırkasını bu demde giydim ise gah çıkarım gökyüzüne seyrederim alemi. Gah çıkarım gökyüzüne seyrederim alemi. Yar Ali Adan Ali Can Ali Canan Ali. Yar Ali Yaradan Ali Can Ali Canan Ali. Nesimiye sordular ki yarın ile hoş musun? Ben hoşam ve de değilim, o yar benim kime ne? Ben hoşam ve de değilim, o yar benim kime ne? Yar Ali Yar Adan Ali Can Ali Canan Ali. Yar Ali Yar Adan Ali Can Ali Canan Ali. Yar Ali Yar Adan Ali Can Ali Canan Ali. Yar Ali Yar Adan Ali Can Ali Canan Ali. Okay, usually these songs go on and on for like 20, 30 minutes, just like Nusrat Fatih Ali Khan was singing. One single song can go like 30 minutes because the idea is to create an atmosphere that you can really detach yourself from outside world and you go inwardly to explore your own self. But for this purpose, we just cut it short. And from here, I will go. Of course, mystic Sufi tradition in Islam didn't start with Yunus Emre or Rumi or Kabir or Amir Khusrau. They are sort of latecomers in a way. 13th, 14th, 15th century is pretty late in terms of Sufi mysticism. In order to find the root of it, you go way back, hundreds of years back, and almost 100 years after Prophet Muhammad died, something happened in Islamic world because of the heavy expansion, the Umayyads and the Abbasids and interfights and all kind of thing. And also the Islam met foreign cultures like the Zoroastrians of Iran and Hindus of India, Central Asia, shamanist Turks of Central Asia, North Africa, animist North Africa, and then the Greeks. because of that, next 200 years got, yes, there was great victory in terms of expansion of Islam, but also Islam was infused with many, many different traditions which existed hundreds, maybe thousands of years in those localities. And because of that, there was some differences of opinions in terms of what religion should be, how Islam should be conducted, spiritual dimensions of it versus book related or practical aspects of it. And very early days, like 750 or 800, some people started showing a little differences, which is the earliest one was Rabia al-Adawiyya, and then Ibrahim Ethem and Hassan al-Basri, as an individual level, that they became Sufis, the mystics of Islam, who were appreciating the inner beauties of the rules and regulations in Islam, and they were trying to expand on that rather than the outwardly aspects of Islam. So that went on for a while, and then all these people met different kind of mystical traditions too, because mystical traditions didn't start with Islam either. From the time that humanity left the caves 20,000 years ago, they were mystified with the happening around the mountains and the sun and the moon, the days and the daylights, and how the nature works. So through that mystification, they develop mystical ideas. And you can see it in the Greek, Greek mysticism. You can see it in the Sumerians and Akkadians and Hittites, especially the Indian, Harappa region way before Jesus. And then in Christianity, you can see, so this mysticism came, but how it became, rather than being individualistic, how it became an organized thing came a little later. Little later, it is because of, I think, my opinion, through the crusading. There were great crusaders, 5 of them in 200 years between 11th century, 13th century, ravaged this region of where I'm sitting right now in Mersin, Turkey. The Kilikya region of Turkey was devastated too through the crusading armies. And then so people started banding together, and also the monastic Christianity gave some examples of that too in Cappadocia or in Egypt. In the mountains of Lebanon, there were Christian communities which gave, they lived together in a monastic fashion. So we got all these brotherhood in the Sufi brotherhood. And one of the earliest ones was, of course, the calendaries that Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan was singing a while ago. It was singing Mas Kalendar. A little translation of that poem gives you a little idea why they were really excited on the stage. It says, the drunk Kalendar is in his drunken state. The drunk Kalendar is in his drunken state. There is just one echoing sound in my mouth. Ali, Ali, the generous red-robed Kalendar is in his drunken state. This song is written for Lal Kalendar, who used to wear red robes. You can imagine, and it was a wonderful scenery. So the Kalandari dervishes, from my opinion of working on Sufism, created a great tradition from India, almost jungles of Kerala, to the Budapest, Gül Baba. There's a Turkish mystic from a little later period, 15th century, I think, Gül Baba in Budapest. You can see his tomb there, you can visit. So in between these two points from east to west, these calendars went around mountains and the villages, and they usually they shave their heads, their eyebrows, their mustaches, their beards. They made themselves weird, so the people sort of reject them in a way. It's very interesting. they wanted to be unacceptable, because they wanted to be different from acceptable people, because they think the acceptable people, the regular people in the street, they were all confused. They're not really in the cool state of spirit. So in order not to have anything to do with these people out there, they made themselves sort of uglified, almost. And through that, they traveled in between. Everywhere you would find them in Central Asia, in on the Silk Road, in the steppes of Anatolia, in the Balkans, all the way to Bosnia and the Hungary and Greece and Bulgaria. I had the honor of visiting some of their tombs, like Akyazılı Baba, Otman Baba in Bulgaria, Deli Orman, part of Bulgaria. It's a wonderful people they were. And one of them, as a matter of fact, his name was Shams Tebrizi, was visiting Konya that particular day in 13th century, that he ran into this young man, young religious Islamic professor, who was holding his book in his hand and walking in the streets of Konya. And Shams Tabrizi ran into him. He just grabbed the book and threw the book into a little creek. And then he said to Jalaluddin Rumi, that happened to be, he said, whatever you're looking for is not in those books. And then he walked away. Young Jalaluddin Rumi, Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi later, he was astounded, and then he searched for this older gentleman whose name was Shams Tabrizi, and they bonded together almost for a year. They didn't separate it even 1 minute, and Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi was converted from being an Islamic theology professor into a Sufi mystic poet and philosopher. That's how his conversion happened. It was like a Buddha point, that like Buddha stayed under Bodhi tree and then enlightened. It was just like that. So the calendary base for Sufism is very, very important. And I said Kerala, I mentioned Kerala because around 10 years ago I visited Kerala for concert, and my friend Parvati Baul. Bauls are the Indian singers, Indian devotional singers that in Turkey we call them ashiks. So Baul, Parvati had a Kalandari guru living in the Kerala forest. He used to come out once in a while. Parvati told me that he used to shave his head, his eyebrows, just like they did 700, 800 years ago. So I am assuming that tradition still goes on in the jungles of Kerala in a way. It's an amazing thing. All that modernization and the modern world, 21st century, didn't affect that tradition. Very strong. So from there, let's come to 13th century, where our friends Yunus, Kabir, Rumi, Amir Khusrau has something to do. And in order to come to them, we really have to think about Silk Road, because you see, Silk Road is the tying crossroads of all these cultures, especially where these names are connected historically, which is Balkh, Samarkand, Bukhara. That corner is so very important in the history of mystical traditions, Sufism, and history of everybody also. You know, we Turkish people who live in Anatolia today, like in my hometown, I'm from the Yörük nomadic people from the Taurus Mountains. Our ancestors came from the same region, Central Asian steppes. One day they said, enough is enough, let's go to the West. And then they came around year 1000 or so, long before, everybody blamed Genghis Khan for moving west, but we moved 200 years before he was even born. So we came here through Samarkand, Bukhara, and all those places. We came here. So we have something to do with the Silk Road. And we brought our shamanistic beliefs tangled up with our recently converted Islamic beliefs. We just brought them all together here. And then Yunus Emre, Yunus Emre was a mystic, but his background came from Silk Road too, because he was sort of a remote disciple of Ahmed Yesevi, who was from Yesi, which was in Uzbekistan today, very close to Samarkand, as a matter of fact. So through Ahmed Yesevi and his people, his disciples moved with the Turkish people when they came to Anatolia. In later years, they affected Sarı Saltuk, Barak Baba. These are great mystics of their times, and then Hacı Bektaş and Tapduk Emre and Yunus Emre became a mystic and became a mystical giant through this silsile we call this, through the schooling of from these people. So that is Yunus Emre's connection to Silk Road. And then Amir Khusrau. Amir Khusrau is very interesting. When I first met Amir Khusrau's history, rather, it carried so much parallels with Rumi, Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, that it is amazing, because they were from. His father was from Samarkand area, Turkish. He was from the Karahitai, Lachin tribe of Karahitai Turks, and then through beginning of 13th century, when Genghis Khan started his incursions into the Central Asia, they moved to Balkh, where Rumi's father Bahauddin was living already in Balkh, present-day Afghanistan, Central Asia. And interesting enough, almost the same years, Rumi's father moved south and west to Anatolia, to Konya, or rather Karaman, and Amir Khusrau's father moved to Delhi area through Kültegin, another Turkish sultan in Delhi. So this was very early, very early of days, and so that is a very interesting connection, Balkh connection. As I was saying, it was a crossroad between Central Asia and West, North and South. So people moved, and they brought whatever they knew. They brought their genes, their philosophies, their religion, and their mysticism. They brought everything. And because of that, my look doesn't really look like a person from Samarkand or from Kashgar or Urumqi, because we changed. Most probably my ancestors like Tuğrul Bey, Çağrı Bey, the Selçuk Bey from 1,000 years ago, they looked a little more different. Maybe they look more like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan than me. But along the way, we moved. We spent almost 200 years in Iran, in Isfahan, all those areas, and then we came here. So along the way, our music changed, our language changed a little bit, our genes, how we look changed, our culture changed. Very interesting thing to follow. That if you can trace it, it's a very interesting thing. So just like that, Amir Khusrau, his father moved to India. His mother was a Rajasthani Rajput, and so here you go. In the first generation, Amir Khusrau became Indian in a way. He was Muslim, but the genes mixed up. And but the culture somehow kept going. Culture kept going because they were both Muslims. They were both Muslims. They grew up in that Islamic culture household from mother, father, neighbors. And then when they came to a point of looking inwardly and seeing things in batin fashion rather than zahir, the outward fashion, they developed their mysticality, mysticism through that Islamic identity, Islamic culture. That's why they are similar in their poetry, in their philosophy, in their practices. It's very similar. Okay, from here, I will also, so we are trying to make the connection. And let's talk about Kabir a little bit in this sense. Kabir came a little later, almost 100, 200 years later. However, it's very difficult to know when Kabir lived, because these people, the difference between Kabir and Amir Khusrau and Yunus and Rumi are very similar. Amir Khusrau was a city person, urban Sufi, just like Rumi was an urban city Sufi, because Rumi was in Konya. It's the capital city of the Seljuk Turks. And Amir Khusrau lived in Delhi, which was the capital of the Delhi Sultanate, the Turkish kingdom of those days. Whereas in the opposite part, Kabir lived in villages, just like Yunus Emre lived in the villages. So here we are seeing two different styles of cultural changes. One is the urban mystic style, the other one is the rural villager style of Yunus Emre and Kabir. And how you can distinguish them from their poetry, their metaphors in the poetry, even the words that they use. For example, you can never see the word, the goats or sheeps in Rumi's poetry. Rumi never talks about the sheep and the goats, but Yunus Emre talks all the time about the goats and the sheep. And in order to make sense of humanity, human conditions, he gives examples of the animals and the birds and the mountains and the rivers. Whereas Rumi talks about human relationships, because he lived in the capital city of Konya. His metaphors are related to those. Just like Amir Khusrau lived in the capital city of Delhi, his poetry talks about earthly love stories of city people, and whereas Kabir talks about more like the Hindu pantheon, and then because he lived with the Hindus too, even though his family was Muslim. Some people say he was born as a Hindu, but then raised as a foster child in a Muslim family. So these rural mystics, unexceptionally, they belong to people. That's why it's very difficult they're accepted by people. That's why we hardly know their birth date, their time of their death, or their poetry. Yunus Emre has, for example, almost 2,000 poems attributed to him. But then, after like 100 years of research, they came up with the idea there's only 300 poems really might belong to Yunus Emre. The rest were written by anonymous people, called themselves Yunus Emre because he's so beloved to people. And then they gave up their own personalities, their own artistic endeavors, these people. They attributed all their poetry to Yunus Emre. So that's why you got 2,000 poems. And I see the same thing with Kabir. For example, great Indian poet Tagore published a book in 1912, I think. Later on, scholars discovered that almost 100 poems in that book, only 6 poems are really come from Kabir himself. The rest of the poems are written by some other people, attributed to Kabir. They sign as Kabir. So it's very, very similar realities of India and Turkey, because people, when they see this poet really belongs to them, he really speaks their tongue, their language, and their metaphors. They really show ownership. And because of that, in Turkey today, there are at least 20 tombs of Yunus Emre. You go 20 different villages, they think Yunus Emre, died in their village. They made up a little tomb, and it's a holy location to visit, 20 of them. And there are at least 30, 40 villages naming Emre or Yunus, Yunuslar all around Turkey. It is similar phenomena to what Kabir has in India. in a way. Okay, let me play another song so you can think about questions at the end. We will do, and this song comes from Yunus Emre himself, and then he says, "Open my heart," and then you see what there is, and then in this population there are many people who are laughing at us because of our mystic practices and mystic thinking, but let them laugh. They wouldn't know anything about these things, and we rely upon our dost, meaning our friend. Yar yüreğim yar, gör ki neler var, canım gör ki neler var. Yar yüreğim yar, gör ki neler var, canım gör ki neler var. Bu halk içinde canım bize gülen var, bize gülen var. Bu halk içinde canım bize gülen var, bize gülen var. Nadanlı bilsin efendim, bizi bilen var, canım bizi bilen var. Nadanlı bilsin efendim, bizi bilen var, canım bizi bilen var. Gülenle gülsün efendim, dost bizim olsun, dost bizim olsun. Gülenle gülsün efendim, dost bizim olsun, dost bizim olsun. Her kim merdane, canım gelsin meydane, canım gelsin meydane. Her kim merdane, gelsin meydane, canım gelsin meydane. Kalmasın cane canım, kimde hüner var, kimde hüner var. Kalmasın cane canım, kimde hüner var, kimde hüner var. Yunus sen bunda meydanı iste, canım meydanı iste. Yunus sen bunda meydanı iste, canım meydanı iste. Meydan içinde canım merdaneler var, merdaneler var. Meydan içinde canım merdaneler var, merdaneler var. Okay, from here, that was a Yunus Emre song. You can see that he has some level of heartbroken quality, his poems, when I look at it, because I made a translation book called Quarreling with God from Turkish to English, and quite a few Yunus Emre songs that I included, and other poets too. And I see that disappointment of his own time's people. It's a little in this poem you can tell, but that disappointment is not negative. He thinks that humanity is like that because they're confused, they lost their ways. So he advises the right way, what to do. Looking the right way for him is following this inner path, this outwardly showing of religion is sort of okay, but it's not enough because it's not doing much good according to him. Because I mean, he lived in 13th century, and Islam was already 6th, 7th century old when he lived, and he lived in an Islamic society 100%. But then whatever he saw, all those rich people, and then the almost slavery-looking practices, and then people worshiping material things, the great materialism that existed. So he's disappointed with those things. So he advises looking inwardly and exploring inner qualities of the religion. But in terms of that, he's not even really heavy duty sort of the missionary of Islam either. He never does that missionary work. He really doesn't care. As long as you're a good person, nice person, that's what he cares from his poetry that we can see. And so that was the Yunus Emre song. We'll sing more of that. So the Amir Khusrau and Rumi, they are urban people. They are city people. They are, because of that, they live in the capital cities of two big kingdoms. That's why they were popular for their people. Like Amir Khusrau served 7 kings and 3 princes in his lifetime. Very interesting. And when I read their names, they are very, very Turkish names. They are more Turkish than our names of today. My name is Latif. It's 100% Arabic name because, once we became Muslims, we sort of left our Turkish naming traditions from Central Asia. Like first sultan that Amir Khusrau saw is Iltutmuş, is the great, as Turkish as it gets, Iltutmuş, Balban, Buğra Khan, Kayumar, and then it gets a little Persianized names, just like the Turkish names became Arabic and Persian. The Turks in India, they started adapting Persian and Arabic names too, like Kaykubad, Firuz, Aladdin, Kutbeddin, kind of thing. But early sultans like Iltutmish, the great sultan who built Qutb Minar in Delhi, that giant minaret, is Iltutmish. That he's right there. Kültegin is another great name in that areas. Very interesting names that you can see because they just came down from Central Asia and they didn't have time to change their names, so they kept their names going for next 100 or 200 years because they kept their language, they kept their Turkish traditions for a while until they really blended into the society and they create a mixture of fusion. So Amir Khusrau, since he lived in a great urban center associated with the high culture of Delhi, the palace culture, the poetry culture, the music culture, he was really fused his Turkish heritage with his Persian high language of their time, with Hindu culture that already exists there. So he made up this very, very fertile ground, which created this Qawwali style of music. He is the inventor of the music that Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan just was singing when you first came into this Zoom presentation, that Qawwali style, devotional music style of choir, chorus, singing back and forth, and creating this electrifying atmosphere where you really lose yourself and then find your really inner self through that losing. And also he created the main Indian musical instrument called sitar. Interesting, means 3 string. He worked on already existing instrument and he created the sitar. He created many Indian musical makams, modes called ragas and raginis. So he was a great musician. He had 3 books on music and 3 divans of poetry. So he was really as a great artistic personality, the Renaissance personality of Leonardo da Vinci almost that he had. And on the other side of the map in Konya, Rumi had the same qualities. He lived in Konya, capital city, and he mingled with great sultans, and sultans' wives were belonged to his Mevlevi order of the Sufis, the whirling dervishes. They had weekly gatherings, the poetry nights, in Meram Bağları. Meram it's a place in Konya. Still, the weekend, gatherings that you do. They had great gatherings and semas, the whirling dervish performances, the poetry nights there. And through his Mevlevi order, the Mevlevi order became the conservatories of Turkish courtly music or urban culture, urban music and poetry. The urban musical styles and poetic styles flourished in these Mevlevi tekkes for next 700 years until even now. Most of the great Turkish composers, Tamburi Cemil Beys and Itris and those people, they came from these Mevlevi tekkes, whereas the Turkish folk music traditions came from the Yunus Emre tradition, and then from later on it became the Bektashi tekkes, Bektashi cemevleri, Bektashi tekkes. They were the conservatories of or literature faculties of the Turkish folk traditions. So we got these two lineages really developed parallel to each other last 700 years, and they became uh, really big literary and musical traditions in our days of today. Uh, from here, uh, so maybe I will recite a little bit of Yunus Emre poem for you so you can familiarize yourself. This is a little bit of my translations with my friend Jennifer Ferraro. Uh, you should pay attention to the inner quality of their message, how similar they are, these four names that I have been mentioning. Uh, and because their humanism and their attention to inner quality is very similar. I am the infinite, the eternal. I am the one who gives life to the soul. For those bewildered, I am a cure, the rescuer and remedy. It is me. I am the one who stands solid as a tree. Who can know my mysteries? How can those without soul eyes see? The one who enters souls is me. At the creation of the earth, I appeared. With just one glance, I brought perfect order. I built an inn of welcome from his power and laid the foundation for love. It was me. So that is Yunus Emre for you. And then you can see more or less the same inner message in Kabir. Here, as you can tell, it is me from the creation. I just, in one glance, I made it possible, kind of thing. It's almost, it's in those days, Ibn Arabi's Wahdet-i Vücud philosophy, that we have something to do with the Creator. We have a unity with the Creator. You can tell from Yunus Emre's poetry, that little poem, that he is subscribing to that idea too, which in Indian philosophy, and especially the Indian Sufi mystics, you can see it again and again. And here, a small short Kabir poem that you find the same idea. Do not go outside your house to see flowers. My friend, don't bother with that excursion. Inside your body, there are flowers. One flower has 1,000 petals. that will do for a place to sit. Sitting there, you will have a glimpse of beauty inside the body and out of it, before gardens and after gardens. So you don't have to go out. Everything is in you, just like Yunus said a while ago. From here, and I like to also show similarities between Yunus, Emre, and Kabir in terms of the Bhakti movement, which is the passionate devotion movement, which existed long before Kabir and long before Yunus Emre. It existed in 8th century, started in 8th century in Tamil Nadu and Kerala in southern India and moved toward the north. And from that kind of movement, individualized devotion to the creator, the God or existence started becoming a fashion. And I can find it personally the same thing in Yunus Emre, even though Bhakti movement as a officialized movement never made it to Turkey. It was a great tradition in India, but it went to Central Asia because of that connection, physical connection, and then it with different kind of names it went all over. And calendaries again were the tying up nature, tying up factor in these great traditions between like almost 7,000-8,000 kilometer difference. And very interesting also, the Sufism in Islam and Bhakti movement in Hinduism created reformation movement within these two religious traditions. They push the envelope a little bit. They push the envelope for individualization of the religion. You can have an individual connection to the creator rather than there is a book, there is the mosque, there is the imam, and you just follow them, and then that's how you connect with Allah. Instead of doing that, the Sufis create an individual way of connecting with Allah. Next, starting from Rabia on, with great devotion, passionate devotion, you can have private relationship with Allah. Just like the Bhakti movement had the same thing for Hinduism. That's why it developed. Even today, it is said that there are 9 million people following Kabir's Bhakti movement, and they are both from Muslims and Hindus because his identity is mixed in the imagination of people. So he is both Hindu and Muslim. In his poetry, he sort of implies that too in a way. And maybe that's why I deal with Sufi poetry for last 30 years, Sufi music, and usually mainstream Sufi environment doesn't mention too much about Kabir because his his connection to Hindu mysticism, I think it's sort of a negative point for them. So they don't talk about Kabir too much. But for me personally, he really unites the entire humanity. He has great personality in terms of that. Just like Mirabai, which is again into the Bhakti movement, Mirabai, Mahadevi, Andal, Bhagat, Pipas, Tulsidas, and Nanak, Guru Nanak, happened to be the founder of Sikh religion, along with these Bhakti poetry. So I am not sure it requires some research, but we have a great mystic poet from Erzurum, city of Erzurum, Alvarlı Mehmet. When I did my research on Bhakti movement, there is a great movement from Tamil Nadu, southern India, called the Alvars. Alvars meaning those who immersed in God. That these are Vishnu oriented Bhakti movement. Alvar and Alvar in Erzurum. I'm not sure how connected they are. It's worth to check it out. All these connections shouldn't come as a surprise, as a matter of fact, because India is right there. When I have to go to America, to San Francisco, I have to fly almost 15, 16 hours. But when I go to Bombay, I only fly 4 hours from here. So hundreds of years ago, without the Boeing 737, 47, people really went around. Calendarily went around. And Buddhist monks, Hindu monks being spotted in Damascus, in Urfa, Edessa, some other places too. People really went around. They brought their cultures, they used themselves, their ideas as glue, gluing these cultures together. That's why in India, when you go, there are many musical scales like ragas. Nihavent makam in Turkish music is the kirvani in Indian music, for example. I am very easily collaborating with the Indian musicians on my instrument because I play the same Nihavent song, and then they can connect with me musically very easily because the same scale. And it's not surprising because we really traveled Silk Road again. On the Silk Road, we did things together, and then we learned from each other, we gave things each other. And for example, uh, the great food of Hyderabad, that the rice food, uh, biryani. My favorite Indian food, Hyderabad biryani, is seriously Uzbek pilau from Samarkand, Bukhara. It's so similar, also so almost the same, because everything really gets mixed up in a very creative and very humanistic way. With this, I will maybe I'm going from from one end to another, but somehow these are all connected. I'm trying to show that they are connected. So next connection is gonna be through my little piano sitting here. I am going to play a song on the piano, and this is again from a Yunus Emre poem. Uh, this Yunus Emre poem is so interesting again. It is also from that Silk Road idea because it talks about love. Bezirgan. Bezirgan means merchant. So the Silk Road idea again. Here it says he he implies himself as a merchant of love, which all these people, Kabir, Yunus Emre, Amir Khusrau, and Ibn Arabi, and later poet Niyazim Misri, they are all merchant of love. They buy and they sell love. But this love is sort of a different kind of love. Unfortunately, language has its limits. So we call whatever happens between Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt as love, and when they get divorced, we say their love has ended, and then you have to use the same word for Yunus Emre's love too. Sort of, I don't like that, but unfortunately, under the circumstances of these language, you have to use that. So here it says, aşk bezirganı, sermaye canı, bahadır gördüm cana kıyanı. The merchant of love, his only capital is his soul. And I am seeing the greatest knight fighter when this person gives up from his soul, kills himself. That is the nafs, the inner desire that you kill, and you sort of liberate yourself. So this is that song. Aşk bezirganı, sermaye canı, aşk ve zirganı, sermaye canı, bahadır gördüm, cana kıyanı, bahadır gördüm, cana kıyanı. Zehi bahadır, can terki durur. Zehi bahadır, can terki durur. Kılıç mı keser himmet giyeni? Kılıç mı keser himmet giyeni? O da yandırdın, külün savurdun. O da yandırdın, külün savurdun. Öyle mi gerek seni seveni? Öyle mi gerek seni seveni? Zinhar ey Yunus, gördüm deme gel. Zinhar ey Yunus, gördüm deme gel. O da yakarlar gördüm diyeni. O da yakarlar gördüm diyeni. Evet, bu şiirde, in this poem, Yunus Emre is arguing with Allah a little bit, arguing with the beloved, because these people, these Sufis, they like to argue with the beloved, with Allah, because they feel very confident in their relationship with the beloved. If you have in our private life, I'm giving an example, if you have a little suspicion about your relationship, the quality and strength of relationship, you never argue your beloved. When she or he says something, you swallow and you say, okay, because you know that you might pay a big price next morning. You might be kicked out in that relationship. But with the Sufis, they are so sure about their relationship with the beloved, they argue. As a matter of fact, when I finished the translation project, this book, I had to find a title for the book, and then I put quarreling with God, arguing with God. And then it was a little abrasive, apparently. When I took this to Turkish Undersecretary of Religious Affairs in Ankara, I thought that they would be interested. This is already translated into English, and it would be nice to have a Turkish printed book. And then the first thing he noticed, the person in charge of publishing, noticed the title. He said, well, couldn't you find another title for this book? I said, well, I mean, this is what it is. It's just like Yunus Emre argues with the beloved. He says, because he gives an example of Hallaj Mansur. He was burned, he was killed because of his mystical ideas. And Yunus says, is it justful now? It is just that you burn Hallaj because he loves you. So he protests that, Hallaj's burning in a way. So these poets, especially the Bektashi order of poets, really argue with Allah all the time. Like Nesimi is the greatest arguer. And then Sayyid Saifullah Nizamoğlu is another one. Kul Himmet and Edip Harabi in our times, 100 years ago, is a wonderful arguing person. Hilmi Dede Baba is another one. Muhyiddin Abdal. So arguing with the beloved is an essential thing in Sufi philosophy, it seems. Kabir does it all the time, and in a certain degree, Amir Khusrau does it too. So this can go on and on, but maybe Emre, maybe we can open up some questions, something like that, so I can explain more based on those.
Yes, we have some questions, and they're Latif Polat, and we can move on to questions and answers. There's a criticism from Muhammad Isa. He's from Pakistan, and he says that most of Sufi music and powerful singers in every way came from modern Pakistan. Modern Silk Road is actually in Pakistan, from Sabri to Nusret, all they were Pakistanis. Pakistan has much Sufi poetry. Baba Farid, Bule Shah, Mian Baksh, to everyone are from current Pakistan. What would you say about this comment?
Yeah. Well, my apologies. In my brain, I put them all together because my true desire, historically speaking, was I'm in Pakistan, Bangladesh shouldn't be another countries. They were one single big, really beautiful state. And unfortunately, the British Empire, just like just like they did for the Ottoman Empire, they divided and little dinky little places. They did that. That's my personal political position. That's why when I say India, Qawwali music, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, Ali Khan, and everything, I always think that they are together. That's my apologies. I apologize. Yeah, but I appreciate. I mean, Pakistan is our brothers, and but in the big realm of political unities, I always see them together because it feels that they are together. I travel. I was never able to go to Pakistan yet, but in India, I mingled with many Indian Muslims, and so I am assuming that's like almost Pakistan in India in a way. So because of that, I didn't mention the name of countries separately. But the person who wrote that question is 100% correct. I mean, the cultural heritage of Pakistan is really big, really big. As a matter of fact, Babur is buried in Pakistan, and all those wonderful historical places where these wonderful things happen in Pakistan. So the question is a very rightful question, but my answer, my apology, is because of that, my wishful thinking, I guess, that they are all together and this really great, whatever the name is in that case, like a big state, very powerful culturally state exists in the world in order to balance all these nonsense of today.
We had this program. I mean, the Silk Road goes to bring everyone together, and that's the idea. And Yunus Emre, and in the Turkish poetic tradition, there is this saying that 72 languages should be all together. There shouldn't be any borders. Yunus Emre has that. And that was old Babylonian story came out of. They built a tower and the god was angry and said, don't understand each other, but we want to understand each other. And the unifying thing. And the Silk Road, of course, there's many routes, and it's becoming alive again, which is the great thing. And thanks for this science journal, which I said with a moral conscience, is bringing us together. And also, of course, scientifically, Central Asia Silk Road brought a lot to the world. And so that's why this hopefully we will learn from different cultures, and hopefully one day maybe someone from Pakistan and all over this world present us the cultural connections, interconnections, and the science is now finding that everything is interconnected, and nature is, and Yunus Emre and all these poets try to put that forward.
Dear Mustafa, could you let me read one more comment? And there's one more comment
Sure.
For Latif Polat. And Yaqub Ibn Yusuf made a comment, and I'd like to read it. And he says, prejudice means prejudgment. So I guess the leftists had prejudgments against Sufi poetry rather than for it. In reviewing the ancient rules of mysticism, Latif left out the characters of the Hebrew Bible who had a personal relationship with the divine: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and his sons, Moses, and later David, opening the way to a very personal spiritual poetry with his psalms. Jesus and later on the Prophet Muhammad grew from this ground. Sorry, I just had to mention this. And he also said that I am sorry not to hear even one Yunus Emre poem in English.
Well, I should say this, that my my ideal vision is I sit down on a map, go back to 20,000 years ago, and start the day that we left the cave as human beings, and then bring it up to here, because everything is so interconnected. In 1 hour of program, it's very difficult to make that connection, and that's why I emphasize Silk Road for this program, is especially because that somehow is the tying up feature of this. Otherwise, yes, I mean there's Christianity in it. Abraham is the common father of all these three major Abrahamic religions. But even before that, I mean, Turkey has Hittites long before Abraham. Turkey has the little south is the Sumerians, and all those things accumulated heritage made possible of our own culture of today. With the good and bad too. Unfortunately, it's not everything is not good, but that's how it developed. The humanity is like building blocks putting on top of each other. So thank you very much for that.
Can I ask
I'll
one
say
more
a
question?
few words about
sorry,
that as
Mustafa.
well. No, that's okay. I mean, there's a poem Yunus Emre said, and he mentions the 4 books, and 4 books all good from A to Z. I'm cutting it a little bit. It's very good, but it's better if you could only enter heart of one person. So they had captured from the Torah to Bible to Quran, and they put them all together. But the main thing is to gain one heart. And I'll read you one poem of short 4 lines from Yunus Emre, and that should it says, "Come, let us be friends for once. Let us make life easy on us. Let us be loved once and lovers. The earth shall be left to no one." So this is that's the in short. We have to be friends for once, and leave aside all these differences. Of course, very important sometimes. It's culturally, it's variety is nice. Of course, you don't want one flower, one thing, but so thank you for everyone. And if there's any other questions, Emre, please read it or comment as well.
There is one more question. I don't know who asked. And are there differences in the Sufism practiced by Farid and that practiced by Rumi?
Well, practice is something very different. Even in religion is very different. The mainstream religion, when you think about that, it differs from region to region in a way, and which school of Islam, for example, you come, it differs. For example, Shafi does this, and then Hanafi does other things, and in Christianity is the same. Like the Catholicism in South America is very different from what happens in Rome. Think about the El Salvadorian Archbishop Romero in 1970s, right? Like very, very almost like communistic interpretation of Catholicism that existed in those days in Central and South America, whereas in Rome it's totally different. So in Sufism it's the same too. Even within Turkey, for example, there are many different tariqas. Mevlevi is one of them. Their practices are different. Their songs are different in their weekly gatherings, for example, when they sing. Their songs might be different. The poetry that they recite might be different. And Qadiris, for example, they do some other things in their rituals, their zikrs. And if you accept like Bektashis as Sufis, which they are for me, it's a debatable point. They themselves sometimes they refuse the Alawite Bektashis, but their Ayini gems are very different. But I personally don't worry about those differences in the appearance. In the batin sense, meaning the inner sense, the soulful sense, they all advocate the same thing. All those rituals are trying to put you in connection, direct connection with the beloved. Whatever you do to have that connection is sort of irrelevant in a way. So that's why in Indonesian Sufism is a little different. Where I come from in America, for example, in California or in Hawaii, Dances of Universal Peace, for example, Hazrat Inayat Khan's followers, well, their zikrs are very different, but their purpose is the same, that through their zikr, like 3 or 4 hours of singing, dancing, is the purpose is to reach a union with the beloved. And some circles, they smoke hashish to do that. In some circles, it is forbidden to do those kind of things. You do, you get toxication through poetry alone, for example. So different kind of cultures. I mean, world is very big. I'm telling you. I traveled 50 countries twice going around the world. It's too big. There are still 150 countries that I didn't go, and many different subcultures in these places. So it's very difficult to expect that one tradition is gonna hold on the same thing all over. So those differences should be welcomed. It's richness of these cultures.
Thank you. If there is no other questions and comments, I would like to again thank everyone who joined in. And Latif, if you want to say one more thing and wrap it up.
Well, everybody, I mean, on this subject matters, you have to work 6 years to get a PhD, which you can. Only one aspect of this, you have to spend 5-6 years to get a PhD. So this subject is very rich, very big, very deep. So in 1-2 hours, it's difficult to do a justful job. But this is a little exposition or exposing the listeners, to these existing things, because I know, for example, my Turkish friends have never heard Kabir, name of Kabir, or Emre Khusrau, or like we have more than 200 universities in Turkey. There doesn't exist one department dedicated to India or Indian culture, for example. It doesn't exist. It is very surprising, very mind-boggling for me that India is in the Turkish sphere in a way. Since the time of Mahmud of Ghazni, the Turks been there. Big Taj Mahal is built by one of our, like Shah Jahan is the son of my uncle almost, because Babur has something to do with us in a way. But nobody knows that, and nobody really cares about that either. I brought 15 great musicians from Rajasthan, Bengal, Kerala, and everything 5-6 years ago to Istanbul at Istanbul Technical University Conservatory. We did a concert. The promoter lost $15,000 because nobody came. No Turkish people came, and we lost. Nobody's interested. So that's why, if my purpose of this thing was to create awareness of these similarities, this brotherhood between India, Pakistan, Silk Road, so we can go forward in this work. That's why you can you can start wondering about this, the research, and then you can write me if you have any questions. And let me close this with a song. It's a good way of finishing and closing the program. Again, thank you very much for joining us. And my apologies to my Pakistani friends. Yes, you were right. And I'm gonna sing a song. You can easily join me with the refrain, Illallah, Illallah, La ilaha illallah, because this is a zikr song for last 700 years. This is from Yunus Emre. They sang this in order to find inner peace and to reach a union with the beloved. Illallah, illallah, la ilaha illallah, illallah, illallah, la ilaha illallah, illallah, illallah, la ilaha illallah, illallah, illallah, la ilaha illallah. Şeyhimin elleri uzaktır yolları, açılmış gülleri vermeye kim gelir? İllallah, illallah, la ilahe illallah, illallah, illallah, la ilahe illallah. Şeyhimin özünü, severim sözünü, mübarek yüzünü görmeye kim gelir? İllallah, illallah, la ilahe illallah, illallah, illallah, la ilahe illallah. Aile gözyaşı Yunus'un yoldaşı, zehirli bu aşı yemeye kim gelir? İllallah, illallah, la ilahe illallah, illallah, illallah, la ilahe illallah, illallah, illallah, la ilahe illallah, illallah, illallah, la ilahe illallah.
Tekrar teşekkür ederiz. İyi günler dileyelim. Tekrar buluşmak üzere. Eğer fikirleriniz varsa yine böyle bir İpek yolu üzerine veya diğer konularda buluşmak üzere. Teşekkür ederiz.
Also in the name of the Believe Utopia magazine, I want to thank everybody who joined us today in this nice event. I also want to thank Ms. Latif Bolat for his beautiful presentation and his really nice musical contributions. Also, big thank you to Mustafa Mersinoğlu, who contributed with his valuable insights to this today's event. And finally, also want to thank to Emre Şembaba, who enabled today's event. So, thanks a lot for having joined us. And have a great day.
Thank you very much.